Hope you're enjoying the series so far as much as I am with our fantastic guests, and we will continue today with Electric Indigo, Susanne Kirchmeier, who I'm going to introduce shortly. So just go through the usual stuff in case anyone hasn't been here before. Collaborate, so everyone here is with their name. If you're not with your name, I can see one person there just with a J. Please do exit and rejoin with your full name, because we can only accept pre-registered guests externally, and then obviously students don't need to register, and it's just for our peace of mind so we know who's in the room. Thank you. Yep, so we're recording the session and including the Q&A and the chat messages, so please be mindful that this is a public forum and act appropriately. If you can't hear me, then that's a problem because I'm speaking, and check your audio settings. So soon I'm going to hand over to our guests, Electric Indigo, who will speak for around about an hour, probably a bit longer. Then we will have the student-led Q&A. So then we'll have a short break so we can stretch our legs. Then we'll have the student Q&A. And then we'll finish at 4:30 UK time. And you're welcome after, so we normally let the students ask the first few questions from their preparation, and then you as the audience are obviously very welcome to put up your hand and take part in that too. Brilliant, so we're almost ready to begin. I will just flash up again for students, for BA students, here is your password for this week's session. If you can't self-register, then just drop me an email. I will always be taking a screenshot of the register as well, so I can just obviously cross-check that you were present. That's it, I think. Did someone have their hand up just then? Stuart having a bit of an issue with the... Don't worry, Stuart, you can also just drop me an email if you're not managing to do the attendance thing. Okay, thank you. So Susanna, if you want to start screen sharing, and then I will do the traditional thing of reading out your biography, which I don't do, by the way, just because I don't believe that everyone can read themselves, but partly it's, as some of you in your second year and beyond will know, it's part of your professional practice to also think about your artist statements and things like that. So I think it's always nice to have that right before we welcome our guest. So, Electric Indigo, DJ, composer, musician, has performed in 45 countries across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. She represents an intelligent and distinguished interpretation of techno and electronic music, and founded the transnational Female Pressure Network. Her DJ sets are characterized by a wide variety, with a clarity of vision and a depth that comes from a deep understanding of the music and the arts of DJing. As a composer and musician, she creates music for concert spaces and clubs, and occasionally for stage plays and short films. In her compositions and live performances, she emphasizes the spatial placement and precise structures of subtly elaborated sounds, often generated with granular synthesis. She premiered her works at festivals like Wien Modern, I can't not do it in the German, Musikprotokoll, CTM, or Heroines of Sound, and composed for Klangforum Wien. Her new album Ferrum was released on Editions Mego in March 2020, and the Republic of Austria awarded her the Kunstpreis Musik in 2020. So congratulations, Susanna, on that wonderful prize. That is kind of new, I suppose. And just on a personal note, I suppose we know each other at least since 2014, when I invited you to speak at a panel that I was organising at CTM Festival in Berlin. And yeah, have remained in touch, I believe, ever since. So really, thank you so much for coming to speak to us today. And yeah, look forward to your lecture very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Annie, and I feel super honored to be invited. And hello, everyone. I'm a bit nervous right now, but yeah, I'll get over it. It was actually quite a trip for me to prepare this lecture, because I thought I might show you some pictures from the past, and I might talk about my artistic practice by going through like some steps in my career. And so I collected images, and I found some funny ones and some cute ones. And I'm also going to show you some flyers from back in the days. And I will take these images to talk about the evolvement of my artistic being, let's say. Okay, let's start. This is young me when I was 20, and I was applying for an art summer course in Salzburg. I was really interested after finishing like an economic school. I was interested in fine arts, and I thought I wanted to be an artist. Then a bit later in the 1980s, I actually started to DJ, and a friend sent me this photo recently. It's a screenshot from a from a dia, and I chose this photo because I was driving an MG. So this is like to relate with London and the United Kingdom, and I was into British cars at that time. Anyhow, before I started to DJ, I was actually working for the Austrian radio stations, and I used to make contributions about fine arts often. But then in around like 91, I discovered after having played like hip hop and funk and soul music, I discovered through a record store in Vienna, Chicago and Detroit techno and house music. And one of the first records, or the first record in that genre, was by DJ Rush from Chicago on a label called Saber Records, which was a sub-label of Trax Records. And Trax Records became really famous for like a typical variant from Chicago, a variant that is somehow in between techno and house. It's like a house groove of drums, but extremely reduced, and that is called Tracks. It comes from the label pretty much. So this is like the first record that got me into a genre of music, and that got me into DJing with full passion. So it's really like a milestone for me, and I want to play this.
You're looking for excitement? You're looking for excitement? You're looking for excitement?
Yeah, when I heard this kind of music for the first time, I was like, what is this? I never heard anything like that really before. And I loved the reduction that it had, and the funk and the groove and the massive bass and the drums. It was, for me, it was really like the essence of what I liked in music before. I was, as I said, I was already DJing, and I have been buying records for several years, and it was mostly what was back at the time called black music, meaning like funk and a lot of 70s soul and also some jazz, but also hip hop. And in the 1980s, it was quite popular to mix all these styles together. But there was always, I don't know, for example, in hip hop, I was always very fond of the instrumental versions. So like when I heard this, it was really like a revelation, and I thought, wow, I must explore this more. And shortly after DJ Rush, um, somebody gave me this record by Underground Resistance, Revolution for Change. And I think this is, yeah, it cannot be overestimated what Underground Resistance from Detroit mean for techno music. It's yeah, they like I was lucky enough to meet a lot of these of my early heroes in person little bit later on. And Underground Resistance was a formation, or still is a formation, around Mike Banks, who runs a record store and the label and is a genius like music producer and instrumentalist. But alongside Mike Banks, at the time, back in the days, it was also Jeff Mills, whom you might be familiar with, because he's like a world-renowned DJ and music producer and artist, and also Robert Hood back in the day. So these three people were Underground Resistance. And when I met them in person in the 1990s in Detroit, Mike Banks told me that for them, techno was like a fusion or inspiration from combining both George Clinton, who is like a legend in the P-funk and funk music, and Kraftwerk. And here, of course, I also have a listening example, and the Kraftwerk reference you might notice. I guess you're familiar with Kraftwerk. It's an important band from Germany who started to make music in the 1970s and became really big in the 1980s and 1990s with like a very seemingly cold but somehow very funky kind of beat-driven music with a lot of synthesizers. Yeah, that's underground resistance, and there is a lot more to discover if you're not familiar with it. Um, yeah, I think it's just still so amazing and so great, and still very inspiring. And imagine, for me, one of my favorite hip hop artists were Public Enemy, so I could. Of course, this record reminded me of that kind of attitude and sound. It was just like so new and so fresh to me, and there was so much energy, and I got like totally enthusiastic about this kind of music. And I tried to actually bring this enthusiasm to the Austrian radio, and I was lucky enough to do an interview with all three original underground resistance members, and the reaction was not so enthusiastic, because in Austria at that time, that must have been like in late 91 or early 92, most of the people in the music scene that I was around back then thought of techno as a music for and by German fascists. So because it's so marching, and they did not relate it at all to black culture, which it actually came from. So I felt quite misunderstood, and at the same time, I was lucky enough, and I think a lot in my career and in my evolvement depended on happy accidents. I was lucky enough to meet DJ Hal from Munich, and he actually was invited by some friends of mine to play in Vienna, and they couldn't afford a hotel, so they asked me if I could like host him at my place, because I have a guest room here, and they knew about it. So that's how I met DJ Health from Munich, who is still like a internationally working DJ and artist. And through him, I discovered the whole universe of the German techno scene in the early 1990s, and in particular places in Munich where comes from, and places in Berlin. And the very first techno party that I was invited as a DJ to was in these circles in Munich. The Ultra World, which was a like a party series in the early 90s, and later on a quite famous club, Ultraschall, evolved from this project. And this, of course, is an old flyer. It's like my first techno DJ flyer with my name on it. And right to this image is the backside, where I took notes from other DJs from records that I wanted to have. So I was like sucking everything in, and always like big ears and big eyes, and trying to learn like 24/7. A bit later on, I was like lucky enough to be invited to record music for the label that was also doing these parties in Munich. The label is called Disco B, and what I'm going to play now is actually the second record that was put out with my name on it. And it was a split EP. On one side, it was DJ Hell, and on the other side, that's me again. At that time, I did not have any like music making equipment at home, so I usually made records in or tracks in other people's studios. And this one was produced at Richard Barth's studio, a guy in Munich who still makes music, and who, yeah, was a resident artist also from the ultra world and ultraschall and disco bass. So this was the kind of sound I was into at that time. Yeah, as you might have noticed, there is not like really a lot of structure. There's nothing like uh, like a chorus or something. And that's why I think the term track is actually quite useful for this kind of music, because it's more about the rhythm and the sounds that are used, and much less about anything that comes close to a song arrangement, or the arrangement is actually with this kind of music, like DJ tracks kind of music. It's actually like part of the work of a DJ to create something like a story or an arrangement with these single elements that are the tracks pressed on records. The advantage of this is that you somehow get the feeling from this kind of repetitive music that time and space can be dissolved in one own's perception. And that was part of the excitement about club culture and dancing in something that was very dark and full of like bass and sound. It was like this black box where time and space were endless or did not exist at the same time. And this is one of the fun photos I came across actually recently, with DJ Hell in the front on the left side with the Carhartt cap, and the Cosmic Baby t-shirt wearing a creature. That's actually me. And right left of me is another one of my heroes back in the time. That was DJ Rock, a resident DJ at the famous Berlin club Tresor, like a famous techno club in Berlin. And this photo apparently was taken at one of the huge raves back in the time, May Day. And Mayday was something interesting because it was like the first step to really like turn this underground kind of music, the DIY type of making the music and playing the music out into a more commercial and mainstream direction. But in '92, I think I still thought it was super cool, and I was obviously quite proud to be present at this rave. In 1993, I actually moved to Berlin. I think I forgot to mention that when through DJ Hell, I already said that I got in touch with the German techno scene, but I did not mention that Berlin was really like the mecca for me, and in particular, not only because of the clubs there that were already after the wall fell down, there was this unique situation in the city where a lot of space was available. And I think that's actually one of the most important factors, how like new culture and new youth culture maybe can develop is the availability of physical space where people can try out things and experiment and fool around. Anyhow, that was not only the clubs were really important and amazing for techno music, but also a record store that goes by Hardwax Records in Berlin. And for me, as an aspiring techno DJ or up and coming maybe techno DJ, that it was totally clear that is the place where I want to be. It was really like kind of a mecca for me. You must imagine that distribution of music worked in a really different way before the internet. You, for example, like a record from that recently came out, I could buy that record maybe at Hardwax, but I would not find it in Vienna. And if I found it, then maybe a year later. So that was really slow, and it was really like a huge asset to get the most wanted records or the best records that nobody else had, and was completely blown away by when a DJ played it. To get these records in time was a huge asset for becoming like a good DJ or a popular DJ. And for me at that time, I was actually practicing in front of the audience. That means I did not have good mixing skills, and I learned by doing. I did not have turntables at home because I completely ran out of money in the like when I started to become really interested in techno. I was like totally broke, and I was actually hitchhiking to gigs, and yeah, it was a very adventurous time, but it was also fun. Nevertheless, I could not practice DJing at home, but I had the huge advantage that I bought my records in Berlin at Hardwax, where I could get some really like rare tunes, and therefore it seemed to be justified to let me play, even though my beat mixing skills were quite poor back in the day. Yeah, anyhow, I was lucky again that I could finally move to Berlin in 1993 and start to work in the store. And I had said this, that I wanted to work there like already a year ago or so, like pretty much from the first moment on when I first set my foot into this store. And it took a while, and then Mark Ernestus, who is still is the owner and the boss of the store, called me in Vienna and said, "Hey, we need like a holiday replacement for Helmut, who was by then like doing the packaging for the mail order in the back room." And kind of the next day I left Vienna and I moved to Berlin, and that's me in that time. And I'm wearing this experimental t-shirt, EX, and that was my label back in the days, meaning that this was the record label that actually put out the very first record with my name on it. Experimental was a label from New York, and yeah, how did I get on a label from New York? That had to do with some guys from Vienna, Patrick Pulsinger in particular, who is also like a very gifted music producer and musician. And him and a friend of his, they moved to New York for about 3 months in the 90s, and they got to know people from the clubs there, like the huge famous clubs, Limelight and Tunnel and Palladium. They all belonged together. And I decided to visit them actually together with DJ Hell. And yeah, so we became acquainted with the guys who were running this label, and with Abe Duque and other people from that scenery. And one of these people were actually Damon Wild, and he ran a label with another person who was working in the office of these clubs, and her name was DJ Moneypenny. I can't even remember her like real name, but DJ Moneypenny was not only working for the clubs Palladium and Limelight and Tunnel, but she was also helping Damon to run this label Experimental, and she was doing something that is very peculiar nowadays, but on the other hand, somehow very typical for that time. She was doing a fax magazine, and I don't know if you all even know what a fax is or a fax machine. It was a way of telecommunication in written form through a telephone line, where people had like machines on each end, and one would like scan the text and translate it into some audio codes, and on the other hand, on the receiving end, the audio codes were retranslated in some images, and then the fax machine could print a fax. So she was doing like a magazine that was disseminated via fax, and that magazine was called Brand X. So you have the X again. Anyhow, I got to know these people, and I think they were quite fascinated that I was playing this kind of like hard techno and fast hard sound, and like my shaved head, and they thought it would be great to put out a record that I did. So I sat down with Patrick Pulsinger, whom I mentioned already, who was from Vienna, and during the time that I lived in Berlin, actually lived here in this place. So he kind of took my room here in this flat. And we made music together, and this was it. yeah, you get the idea. Yeah, it's quite fun. I still like this record. Oh yeah, what I wanted to mention is how do you start to make music when you're just a DJ? Like when you, first of all, when you try to beat mix, you have to analyze what is going on in the music that you're playing, because you have to adjust the tempo of the tracks. And that is quite like essential and natural way to recognize, for example, what a kick drum is and what a snare is. And you recognize where a snare typically can be in a certain genre of music. Let's say if it's like a typical house record, the clap or the snare typically is on the second beat of a 4/4 bar and on the fourth beat of a 4/4 bar. So you start to recognize certain patterns that are typical, but not only this, you also start to recognize typical sounds. And then when you're, or at least that was the case, that was the case with me, when you're in a group of people who are all interested in music and who are all curious and then who are maybe nerdy as well, you start to talk about the qualities of these sounds, and then it's really quick and kind of natural, and I think it's still the case that you hear like these rumors and this kind of like gossipy bits of information when people say, oh, that's the 909 bass drum, for example, and the Roland 909 drum machine was like a really essential drum machine for the evolution of techno, or for the sound of techno. Probably all the tracks, apart from the DJ Rush track, I assume, but all the other tracks I played so far here in this lecture, they probably do have a 909 kick drum to it. So it's really massive and it's really hard and it's really like punchy. So without knowing these machines, I already started to hear the names of the machines, and all this information was passed on usually in a very enthusiastic way. So that just by curiosity, I was asking questions and like, how does it look, or how do you make music with it? And then of course I had friends who made music themselves and who had equipment, and I took the chance and I visited these studios and I started to play around with such machines myself. And so it felt really natural for me to slowly grow into this occupation with synthesizers and drum machines, and it was a fun approach. And there was never like the question of is something good enough to be put out. It was always more like a jam session, and then you would record it on digital audio tape, and then you would just take the one part that worked best from a huge take, and it was sent to the pressing plant and put out on record. And it was never like, at least in the scene I was part of, we usually didn't think, or I never thought much about is this good enough, or does this meet any particular standards, or it was more experimenting and fooling around to a certain degree. And I think that's a nice quality, how to approach it in the first place. Yeah, this is another like pick playing at one of my first international gigs outside Germany or Austria, actually in the French Alps. And I was trying to reconstruct what the record I was playing there. It's a Dance Mania record, which is another legendary label from Chicago, legendary for putting out this typical Chicago tracks stuff like DJ Rush, whom I already mentioned before. I couldn't quite figure it out. Nevertheless, we heard something of that genre already. And this is a picture of me in front of the famous Hardwax record store. Nowadays it's in a different location, but this is where I used to work. And I found this only a few years ago. It's like part of a documentary from German TV about music scene, and yeah, just so that you see the scenery. I will show you the video, but I give the interview in German, so I played only very shortly.
Wo es eine Auflage gibt von 1000 oder 1500 Stück. Die Techno-Szene lebt eigentlich vor allem auf den kleinen Partys.
Yeah, I'm talking about like how many records are being printed, and I talk about 1000 or 1500 as a small edition. And nowadays this would be pretty big. Yeah. Okay, so that was my Hardwax time and my Berlin time. And that's another fantastic picture. I love that one. First of all, it was in a really cool club, like a very small, very underground club in Berlin called Electro. And one of the people who ran this club is actually ever since like a friend of mine, and nowadays also my booking agent. Her name is Mo Loschelder. And so there are a lot of connections with this picture. And you see Jeff Mills, he's sipping on a drink. And you see DJ Rock again. And I'm on the very right side with this t-shirt that with a huge letter saying Bash. And behind me or left of me is my boyfriend back at the time, a Danish guy DJ called NNN, and he's wearing like an electro t-shirt, so that was the logo. And then behind Rock there's DJ Hell again, and the guy with the fist is a resident DJ of another like very important club back in the days in Berlin from E-Werk, and his DJ name was Terry Bell. And the guy from Cologne at the decks, you can't see him, Triple R. So yeah, that is what it looked like and kind of felt like, very small, very intimate, and very well connected. I think this is still part of the motivation for me nowadays, or not still. It's actually like one of the driving forces that keep me going is to feel connected with people who are not necessarily living in the same city or in the same country, but with whom I share, or at least I have the feeling, or may it be an illusion, but it feels like I have connections with people who come from a different culture and different background, and that is just like extremely motivating. Yeah, and this is a little aspect and a little memory of that kind of feeling too for me. Yeah, and that's this is just so cute. I had to include it. Also because DJ Rock was like really like my role model as a DJ, because he was like the coolest DJ ever, and I wanted to be somehow like him. And we were like both at Tresor, and in the garden of that club, somebody took this photo. And I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure, like on my arm, you see the letters R and O, and I guess either I cannot have done it myself, so somebody else probably painted this on my arm because I was such a fan of the guy next to me. Yeah, this is another flyer of a party that nowadays you would say I could co-curate. Of course, we didn't use these words back then. The party was thrown or organized by Ken NN. You see his name again on the flyer, and his friends in Copenhagen. And yeah, that's another example of international cooperations and kind of like this peer group that spans over many countries. And we put together our dream lineup with DJ SP from Minneapolis and Jeff Mills, of course, again, super lucky that we could have him. Another still good friend of mine from Vienna, Daniel Lodig, his name is like upside down, yeah, side of the circle. And then also something that really happened only very few times, it's one of the live acts, is Cyrus, and these are actually the basic channel guys. That is, if you're familiar with techno, then you for a longer time, then you probably came across this name, um, Basic Channel, because they were like kind of the blueprint of what was then labeled dub techno. So it's like a very dubby sort of trippy kind of sound, and they performed under the name of Cyrus at this party. So that was really cool. Yeah, that's me again. I used to work for a radio station, Kiss FM in Berlin. They for a little while, and did another like radio program there as well. It's just a beautiful photo, so I took it in. And yeah, here I'm sporting a super cool t-shirt with Underground Resistance glow in the dark skull. It's a flyer from Belgium. This I added because it's just like a very typical example of graphic design from the 1990s for a rave party. Yeah, it's a French rave party, and I don't even know where it was. It doesn't say on the flyer, but from the telephone number, I assume it was in Paris. On the other hand, there were some people who use graphic design that still looks cool, like the Electro Bunker people in Cologne, whom I'm still friends with, like Jungle Fever, which was a record label back then, and Dr. Walker, another artist who is still a friend of mine. And from that same kind of circle came Biz OD. His name is actually Can Oral, and he makes music as Khan as well. And he used to live in New York. So again, you have this circle in New York, and he was the brother of one of the Cologne guys. So there was New York or Cologne, and there was also the Vienna guys in New York, and Berlin, of course, etc. So you see how all these circles kind of overlap or overlapped, and this was one of my first gigs in New York City. Actually, my very first gig was 1993 at the Limelight, which is absurd because it's it was such an important club back in the time, and I was maybe not quite ready to do it, but I took pretty much any challenge. Yeah, and that was another not another, but this was a slightly absurd event. It was a so-called air rave, and that means that, it really went in a quite commercial direction. The whole scenery with Mayday, etc., and air rave was part of that, and they chartered an aeroplane and did like rave party in an aeroplane and in an airplane, sorry. Yeah, and I was one of the DJs they booked, and some DJs could play in the plane, and people were smoking and dancing in the plane. And I was actually playing then on this typical vacation island, Crete in Greece. So yeah. Oh, and this flyer is from a really cool event. That was a party series that I totally loved, Hard Edged in Berlin, and you can see Electric Indigo, Renee, and Pete on the second floor. We were all from Hardwax. And then you see Heliscan, and Heliscan is actually a project name that my now partner Robert Henke, aka Monolake, used. So this is the party where we met in person for the first time. And for personal reasons, I added it in the collection of images that I show here. Oh yeah, and in the 90s, I spent a lot of times also in the United States, and I was kind of like traveling back and forth, and that came through my enthusiasm for Detroit techno and Chicago techno. So I started to visit more and more, and I knew some people already in New York, I think like for quite many years, I went to the United States maybe every 6 weeks or 2 months or something like that, and I had some fans, and one of these fans, she gave me this drawing she made at some rave back in the days. Yeah, another cute photo of me spinning. And actually in 1998, you see, I was DJing like internationally and traveling quite a lot, and that meant for about 10 years or so, I played maybe like 3 or 4 gigs pretty much every week. And often these gigs were in different cities, or they always were in different cities, but also different countries, and sometimes even within 1 week, different continents. So I was traveling massively and hardly ever at home. And you can imagine that since I always made music at other people's studios, that they already knew like how to work or the machines and how to do like the details and all the technical stuff that needs to be done when you want to record music. And I simply did not find enough time to really get into producing my own music, even if I had very specific taste, I think. But I did not really go into details. So that is one of the reasons why I started to find like what one could call like some sort of signature sound or something that goes in that direction, or an artistic identity as a musician. Why that took so many years, because I did not spend enough time actually producing my own music. And the reason was I DJ too much. I think it's mutually somehow almost exclusive. If you are a super busy DJ, I'm always wondering, how do people find the time to work in the studio if they're traveling all the time? Well, maybe nowadays they make music on their phone, which is nice, but I think you have to take a first step to get into production, and then you can easily do something in between and on the fly when you happen to have time. But what else happened in all these years that I traveled and that I DJed was that people confronted me with remarks about how interesting or how astonishing it was that I DJed while also being a woman, or yeah. And usually, when I started to DJ, this never like came into my mind that it could be something strange or something that unusual, because I already had like a record collection. I was interested in music. I was buying music. I saw other people play music, and that's how I got into it, because of like fascination and enthusiasm for certain music. And yeah, like I was really forced by the outside world to deal with the issue of what we now call gender diversity. I was not really like, I was only sucking in like all information about making music and about other producers and records and labels, and nothing really that political at that time. While nevertheless, of course, I knew a lot of other women who also were DJs, and whom I was partly friends with and partly I didn't know them really. And when this repeated like a few times too often, like a question like, why are there so few female DJs, or something like, are there any other female DJs, or something like, you're not that bad for a woman. This terrible backhanded sort of compliments. Yeah, I could not evade this issue anymore after a certain time. And I noticed when, of course, I was talking about this with my colleagues as well, and I noticed that pretty much every woman who works in the field has heard something like that as well, and was confronted with very similar phenomena. And at the same time, in the mid 90s or in 96, something like that, it became super obvious that the internet is going to be the media of the future. And I was thinking about, when you're confronted with a question like, are there any other female DJs in techno? At 3 a.m. shortly before you have to start to perform, or shortly after, and you're in the club and the volume is at 110 dB or something. It's not an ideal, these are not ideal circumstances to answer the lack of knowledge in a sufficient way. So I thought, okay, I want to have like something I can refer to in such situations that is accessible independently from time and space, ideally. And I thought, okay, conclusion, I need an online database for all the other women who are working in techno, or who are DJs, or who make like drum and bass or whatsoever electronic music, like the field I was working in. And these were the years when female pressure came about. And actually in female pressure, I have to explain this. For me, it's so self-understanding what female pressure is, because I've been dealing with it for 22 years. Female Pressure is an online database and a network for people who operate in electronic music and digital arts. It started out as a network for women, where it was never about biologic sex, but always about gender. So there were like transgender people part of the network from the beginning. But nowadays, with like the third wave feminism and the whole all the topics or issues around intersectionalism and various types of genders, and breaking up like the binary view on gender in general, nowadays we have like a lot more genders than only women or somehow female identifying people. Yeah, so this is a picture from the time when female pressure came about, but I have a bit more information about that later on if we don't run out of time. Yeah, another thing about Detroit was that I was, of course, not the only one who traveled to Detroit just because of the love for the electronic music that came out of the city. But also other people, amongst them my good friend Acid Maria, whom you will see a few times more. Acid Maria is a German DJ whom I've been friends with for a very long time. And she's not only a DJ, but she also studied art and film editing. And she made a documentary about, I think, about Detroit techno. I'm not sure. Anyhow, she interviewed Ron Murphy at NSC Records in Detroit. And Ron Murphy is a absolutely legendary figure in the techno scene, because he was the person who cut like the legendary Detroit techno records. And he, I don't know if he invented that, but he made this really popular, for example, locked grooves. That means on the vinyl record, the needle is not going forward through a spiral of the groove, but is rather going in a circle. And if you put music in the correct length on the lock groove, then you have this one loop or two loops like continuously playing without end. And he was extremely crafty, so he could make really good lock grooves where you would not hear like or almost wouldn't hear like the point where the circle closes. And he also cut records inside out, so that you would start in the center of the record and the end of the record would be at the outside, at the outer rim, stuff like that. So he came up with really beautiful vinyls and cuts, and was therefore praised by pretty much the whole Detroit scene and beyond, of course, internationally. And therefore, RBMA made a special feature about him, and we're not going to listen to it or see it through, but I have a PDF for you that includes, I hope it includes this link. I'm not 100% sure, but you should definitely check this out, because this story is really fascinating and starts with Motown and gives a nice overview of the Detroit techno origins as well. So that's me filming at NSC. And then another word to Chicago and me playing a lot in the United States. I used to have an agency in the United States by my friend Kim Clemens, and she loved mixtapes. And nowadays, like cassettes come back into fashion. And back then we recorded mixtapes, and she produced maybe like 50 of them. So I recorded a mix when I was in Chicago, for example, and then she made this cover with the photo she took, and then made a few copies and sent it to some party promoters. Oh, yeah, and that has to do a little bit with my female colleagues and female pressure, and my other women friends who also were DJs, and we had actually a lot of fun together very often. And this is a drawing by Miss Kittin, who is one of like the biggest female DJs in electronic music, and we were all good friends and playing often together. And she is a gifted. um, she can really draw. And she made this little portrait of 4 of us when we were playing together in Munich. And on the very right, Miti, that's actually Acid Maria, and Kitten is Miss Kitten, of course, with the cat next to her. And Indigo, that's me with a Chicks on Speed t-shirt. And on the left side of the image, that's DJ Cassie, who was back then a good friend of mine and kind of my protege in a way in her early beginnings as a DJ, and now she's super famous and internationally working.
Susanna, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know you've got maybe about 10, 15 minutes, and then so we have some time for the student questions. Just
God.
Sorry to interrupt your flow.
Yeah. Okay. So here's some more pictures, and that is female pressure, and that's again with Cassie, etc. And we had a lot of fun. That was Acid Maria. And now it gets a little bit more serious. I turned to more academic music, and good God, 10 minutes. I will be like really quick now. That's 10 years of Hardwax, and this is, I think I have to, I don't know if that's really as interesting as it seems to me, but I probably have a lot of stuff to tell. Anyhow, that's one of the important projects that I did, but not the most important one. Therefore, I will skip it in the PDF that will come to you. You can watch this incredible video about the genesis of this album cover. And structuring contours was actually my first piece where I started to experiment with multi-channel, and it was about the spatialization of monophonic synthesizers. And let's listen to this. I made a little excerpt of this, which gives some insight in the tools that I worked with. Yes, structuring contours is really, I can consider it a cornerstone piece because it marks like my turn from analog synthesizers, drum machines to digital means, and also my first work where I explore quadraphonic and immersive sound and all these themes. The digital, in particular, the granular synthesis and the multi-channel pieces. This has been since 2011, like more important for my artistic work, and the music became more serious and less beat oriented. And the second really important piece after that, where I created material I could live off for the 5 consecutive years after that, was Chiffre. And Chiffre was a piece that was the first piece where I had a very or the second actually, where I had a very central conceptual approach, and the concept was to restrict my source material that I can use to a very limited pool. And the pool was actually recordings of people talk, and people just recording how they count from 0 to 20 in their mother tongue. And I used these recordings in like very bad qualities technically and very good qualities, all these different kinds of recordings to create like a quite conceptual 15 minutes piece that by means of granular synthesis, again, progress from quite clear representations of these numbers to completely abstracted sounds that came from always like increased processing of this basic source material. And I probably hardly have any time left, but I still want to play like a very short snippet just from the beginning of it.
Once, each, inje, raz, once, raz, uno, each, one,
So this was like the one, as you could have guessed, probably.
one.
And that's the 5 or the 4. And that was also like a surround sound piece. If you listen to some of my material, you will come across some numbers like for the consecutive years in particular, and I will do like a rush now forward to my first album, 511593, which was like my debut solo album. And here you can find like some of the chiffre material in the derivative forms. Yeah, too bad I don't have more time right now. Annie, how are we doing time-wise?
It's up to you. I mean, I guess we should kind of think about wrapping in 5 because we want to have a short break to give yourself a little rest.
Yes.
Before we go into the Q&A. So yeah, but you can also maybe, I don't know, if people have questions about some of the other things, you could play them during the Q&A, but perhaps, yeah, 5 minutes.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. And all this work in the past almost 10 years that led to 2 albums that work with this like core idea. It was the same case with Ferrum, for example, that Annie already mentioned, that came out on Editions Mego, where I restricted myself to recordings of objects and then take it from there. Another one where Annie plays an important role in it, even if indirectly, was a piece called Morpheme, and I got this recording from the panel that Annie mentioned in her introduction from CTM Festival, where
yeah, I remember now. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, Sadie Plant was present, and she said this amazing sentence: "To let noise into the system is a fine art, both in cybernetic terms and in terms of making music too." And this sentence totally resonated with me. And I thought, after Chiffre, I thought, okay, I will do a piece with just this sentence. And that is how Morpheme came about. And I teamed up. At first, it was only audio, and then I teamed up with Thomas Wagensommer, a friend of mine from Vienna, who is a visual artist, and he made representations, like 3D representations of each character, and transformed that into the video part for the music. And that was actually also the first piece that toured a little bit, where I started to tour with live act at the festivals for adventurous electronic music, so to say. So that was really important as well. Yeah, and then I would say we should actually do a break, and maybe I can play some more stuff, or you have some more questions. In the PDF, there is a lot more about granular synthesis and the history, including a text from Robert Henke what granular synthesis, how he describes granular synthesis, which is really sweet. And also some slides about spatialization of music. And I think for me, the most important is this very short part in the beginning. It's always it's nice because you can look at multi-channel pieces in two different ways. So one is about the localization of sound, like whether you want to place it in a certain spot, and you want to notice certain movements of certain sound objects, or whether you want to create some sort of immersion. Of course, this can go both at the same time, but it has a different feeling for me. One more localized and more like a point. The other one is more like a space and the perception of space created through the acoustic properties and the placement of the sounds in various speakers. And in addition to the perception of space that you are maybe in, the perception can be altered through manipulation of the sound. And I feel these things very interesting about spatialization of music. And yeah, that's another topic, how it started with a historic overview, etc. Yeah, and then that is, there are still female pressure slides and about the projects we did in the past and what we are doing now. And yeah, you can have a look at it if you're interested in the PDF. Okay, I would say we make a break now, and I pass on to Annie.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Susanna, for such a brilliant lecture. Everyone is saying you could have gone on, but we must move on to the Q&A. But yeah, thank you. I definitely enjoyed all of those memory trips and old photos and listening to those tracks. And yeah, thank you so much. That was so rich and generous of you to share. all that with us. Okay, so let's take a 2-minute break, and I just want everyone, including you, Susanna, to just kind of step away from the computer, stretch yourselves, take a glass of sip of water, and we'll meet back in 2 minutes. So at 57, just really quick break, everyone.
Yep.
Yeah, let's say 3:58. It's just changed. 2 minutes.
Okay.
We're back here in 2 minutes. Okay, so I hope everyone, including Susanna, has managed to have a little mini break. Will the students, please, who were part of this week's Q&A group, just put up your hands using the hand up function, and I can make you presenters. Thank you. It doesn't matter if you're not actually asking the questions. I don't know how you have decided. Oh, it's a big group this week. Wonderful. Hopefully you've devised some kind of system. So yeah, we'll let the Q&A group lead with, let's say, 3 or 4 questions, and then audience members are welcome to join in by putting your hand up as well. And feel free to turn on your cameras if you wish to the students. So take it away.
Yeah, so it's me leading it. I just want to say first that was easily the most interesting talk out of the 4 we've heard so far for me personally, as I like produce a bit of techno stuff myself. But yeah, I'll just lead with my first. This is a question from me. I'm just interested of how the techno and like electronic scene of when you were coming up in it in the 90s is different to now, because obviously technology and stuff has changed so much, and the landscape in which it inhabits has as well. So how has that changed for you?
Well, the answer is, funnily, the music is going back to a typical 90s sound, which I find hilarious in a way. But on the more serious side, that there is a lot of political aspects on top of music, so it cannot be separated, or it can less be separated nowadays, like a political or socio-political analysis from the scene. That felt really different in like 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and that might have to do with, that might be like a very subjective impression, but it really seems to me that well, no, maybe it's subjective, but nowadays it's so clear that the whole discussion about race, inclusion, exclusion, diversity is really present, and it's very present in the media as well, not only amongst like artists and promoters. Obviously, a huge change is the internet with the dissemination of music, with sharing of music, but also with like promoting oneself or promoting others. Yeah, so there are huge differences when it comes to the music itself. I would say I still love it. Of course, I don't love everything, but there's always something interesting evolving, and it's never like a revolutionary change, something that is completely fresh or completely new and was never there in this form before. But it's a constant evolution that I notice, and I'm very excited basically still that techno is more and more, in my view, fulfilling this promise of ranging from ambient to super brutal stuff and everything in between.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Very insightful. I think I'm introducing who's asking the next question. So I've got here Yusuf, if he's ready.
Hi. So my question was about the album Ferrum and how it consists of heavily processed recordings of iron and metal. And I'm particularly intrigued by the inspiration behind the metal itself and how it found its way into the musical narrative and direction of the album, and why you decided to explore the microtonality of the elements, as well as include metal recordings in the album itself and what it means to you.
Yeah, I think metal, the sound that one can make with metallic objects is somehow very rich in a sense, not only in an acoustical sense, because metallic sounds typically have a lot of overtones. So it is the frequency range is quite rich normally, but also in the connotations or in the feel of the sound. It can sound both like super fine and delicate, as well as super heavy and harsh and brutal again. So this range of characteristics is fascinating, and that is basically the reason why I wanted to work with metallic sounds. And on the other hand, the restriction to quite few actually recordings that I made myself with objects I found in a workplace where I recorded it. This restriction is helping me a lot to make artistic and creative decisions and to find my way through like the abundance of possibilities. And for me, that is one of the crucial aspects nowadays. I mean, I'm super fond of technical developments and about what I can do with my computer, for example, but it can be very overwhelming, like, because there is so much that you could do theoretically, and it's often about it can be exhausting just to pick like the one way you want to go, and having this restricted source material and this very clear starting point for a new work helps me a lot to become productive. Whereas otherwise it could feel tiring just to think about what I could do in theory. So yeah, these are the two main reasons why I started to explore this. And the way like what came out of it was just a matter of inspiration and a matter of the moment. And then no, I forgot something really crucial. It was the first piece where I had the chance that I could develop its artistic form through several performances of the material. Usually I don't have that luxury. A lot of the works I did in the past, I performed only one time or maybe a second time. They were never released. And so a very limited number of people could ever hear it, and even including myself, it was like a very limited experience of my own work. So I did not have the chance to learn much. And with Ferrum, it was different because I could perform it 3 times or 4 times even under various conditions, and therefore get a feel of the material, and that helped me a great deal. So this is also a very important aspect of how Ferrum and the album came about.
Thank you, thank you. I also just wanted to ask quickly, was there a reason you chose like Ferrum as the metal itself as the inspiration behind the album?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not restricted to iron really, because ferrum is a Latin word for iron. But as I said, I like the sounds metal can create, or metallic sounds. That was the reason.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool, thank you, Yusuf. Next question is from Lauren. So,
Hello, thank you for your lecture. So my question, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it, and it's okay if you can't, but I'll ask it anyway. So my question is, do you believe that sound can in some way be an écriture feminine, a way of conveying a female voice, view, narrative, unrestricted by the patriarchal format of language? Or is sound just as much tied into the patriarchal structure? Are the developments of Western music structures impacted by man, or are the uses of technology and instruments impacted by man? Is the male influence still so invasive that it influences the female narrative and prevents the true female voice? I'm sorry if I read that really fast, I'm quite anxious.
It's okay. It's an interesting question, and I don't think I have the answer. I guess the most genuine instrument we all have, no matter which gender, is our own voice. But then again, I'm such a bad person to be about vocal music or vocals, because I hardly ever use my own vocals. Maybe I will do sometimes. Or if I use the human voice, then I start to transform it to a degree that it is not recognizable anymore. But
it's not necessarily to do with the female voice, it's more in the sense of like sound in general. Can it convey a true like female perspective rather than, I guess, language, which is supposedly restricted by male influence?
I don't think, yeah, I don't think so. For example, I don't have the impression that there is female music. I think music is beyond these categories, even though it's interesting to ask such a question. So the discourse around it is definitely necessary and definitely interesting. Still, my answer, I tend to the answer that I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
It's fine. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Lauren. Next is from Vlad. If Vlad's here. I'm not sure if he's actually okay, in that case, I'll just move on to. Okay, cool. I think he. Yeah. Are you gonna type a question instead, Vlad, or should I ask it for you? I'll just ask it. I'll just ask it anyway. Vlad's question is: with a career already spanning 3 decades, how do you manage to stay relevant, and what has kept you going all these years?
Well, what has kept me going is, I think I already mentioned, like a very important part that is the feel of being connected with people from many different backgrounds and the richness of the culture, how I see it. The other thing is, of course, my love for sound and for music, and the inspiration I get from other people evolving and in their artistic expressions and becoming great or better. That's very inspiring for myself. And then the relevance question is tricky, because I had like at least 7 like really difficult years in my career where I hardly made any money from DJing or from concerts, and where I was certainly not relevant in a broader sense for the scene. But I continued to work on my music, or that also gave me the freedom to really get into music production, because I had more time. And luckily, the flat where I'm living is very cheap, so that takes a lot off economic pressure. Anyhow, I think the most important thing is to stay authentic. If you're not like an artistic product in the sense that it is like a designed artist's persona from the first day, if you're more or less yourself when you start, and you want to continue to be more or less yourself when you start, the crucial factor is authenticity, I think. And I managed to stubbornly follow up on what interests me the most, and this might be one of the reasons why I'm somehow relevant still. And another reason is that I'm often very lucky. So yeah, these are the 2 reasons for the relevance thing. And the discourse, like there were times when people were not very friendly against female pressure, for example, and they thought like feminist activities are outdated mostly, or a nuisance. And I continued to still do that, and nowadays it's quite hip. So that's another reason. I think that's a reason why I could play at some renowned festivals, because I and my name and we stand for gender diversity. So when festivals started to deal with the issue of having like a lack of diversity, they started to book me too. Yeah.
Cool. Very good answer. I definitely agree with the what you're saying about authenticity. I think that's very, very important. The next question from group is from Drew. He's with me now, so I should let him go.
Basically, I just wanted to ask you about how you felt being a female in the early techno scene, and how did it affect the way you made music? Did it make you feel like sort of lesser than other people because you were a minority, stuff like that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't know if I ever felt female or whatsoever, because usually I feel like myself. And that, so because that question supposes that I would feel differently if I were a man or a male or whatever gender, and I don't necessarily think so, because I have the feeling that my person exists no matter, like, I don't know how to describe that. Maybe I can compare it with something very banal. Like when you go to the supermarket and you buy a package of potatoes, do you feel like doing this as a man or as a woman or as a non-binary person? I would say probably you don't, because you're just buying some potatoes. So that was me in the beginning when I started to DJ. I was playing music because I wanted to play music, and I also wanted to DJ. And I was super hyped by the techno scene, because all of the energy I felt, and seeing masses of people who dance for the first time actually at the rave. I never had experienced this sort of like huge group energy level before, and the outstanding kind of music and artistry of people like Jeff Mills, or also Aphex Twin. I saw Aphex Twin play live in 1993, and it was amazing. Yeah, so all this input was never like questioned in the way that whether I perceive this as a woman, or whether would this be different if I were a man. It was rather like the reactions from the outside world that felt quite annoying, because a lot of times people would think this was very exceptional, and I thought it was not, because I always knew other women who were doing similar things. So this kind of exoticism that I noticed, I thought it was just a misconception. It's not true. And I still think it's not a lack of women who do interesting stuff, or who do who work in electronic music or so on. It's not a lack of them. It's just a lack of perception of them.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We've got a couple more questions from our group. Is there a limit on how many questions?
No, I just thought we could maybe open it up and see if any of the audience wanted to put their hands up and ask any, and if not, then we could continue. The other option would be, Susanna, I knew that you might have wanted to do a demo during your presentation and you didn't have time, or if you wanted to play us something, we could even, I think you kind of flicked through your slides quite quickly, so we could do a quick poll if there's a wish to listen to something. Again, just to put up those options. Oh, Inaki, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, is that I really wanted to ask my question because
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
I'm really into granular synthesis too. I wanted to know first, what's your approach to it? Like, is it more software like a granulator 2, or more hardware like the Morphogene from Make Noise? And also, I'm a huge Robert Henke fan. So is he like the person that introduced to granular synthesis, or what happened? Or yeah.
Yeah, first of all, it's definitely a software approach that I have. And I think it makes total sense because it's mostly a synthesis that comes from the digital domain. There's only one example I can think of that is a predecessor of granular synthesis. That's Yanis Xenakis. And Yanis Xenakis used to create these clouds of sound by cutting tapes, like magnetic audio tapes in little snippets, and then rearrange that and play it back through several speakers that are dispersed in the room. So apart from that, all the real granular synthesis comes from the digital domain. So all the hardware that exists, like the Morphogene, I think is the name of this Make Noise device, is actually also in the digital domain. So that's it's just in a piece of hardware, a chip in a piece of hardware. So I'm definitely working in the with chips and software, and the granulator was my first like door into the world of granular synthesis. And I think it's a free Max for Life device, so I could just download it, and it's very, I would say, pedagogic in how it is built, because you can actually see what is going on, and you can just drag and drop sound files into the window, and then they are granulated. But apart from the granulator 2, now I also use some other devices, and my second favorite device I will show you now with my little camera is this. It's a iPad app called Borderlands Granular, and it's also very nice because you can, because of the iPad interface. So these are all called grain clouds, and they just granulate whatever audio is under that circle. Just to give you a short view, I hope you could see it. And another thing I want to add is, yes, meeting Robert, and we've been partners for like about 9 years now, so for quite a long time. Having this kind of additional private connection, of course, is part of my motivation or inspiration. That's very important, and it's like I like to compare it with, for example, that in my DJ sets, I love to play music from people I'm friends with. So that gives me another additional kind of feeling of fulfillment. And working with tools that are made by people whom I know is a bit similar to playing music of people that I know and that I like or that I love. So of course, Robert is very important in that regard for me, and not only in this regard.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I think Matthew's got a question.
I have. Hi. That was an awesome lecture. So thank you kindly. You're amazing. So in the 90s, like the concept of using grain clouds and granular synthesis would have been Star Trek future kind of wow. Okay. So let's say from now, in 10 years time, what if you could create a Star Trek style futuristic plugin that does something that technology can't do right now, what would it do?
That's a fantastic question, and I feel really embarrassed now. Oh my God, what would it do? Oh, this is, I mean, Robert now would certainly have like the super, super dope answer and fun answer to that question. Uh, I don't know. I I really don't know. What would you say?
I'd probably have I don't know. I would be. And this isn't too futuristic, but I might go for something like having a data stream, so that it's possible to say tokenized language of a reaction to say a news event and feed that into parameters of a synthesizer or something. That seems like you could probably do that with an API right now. So something that would be completely super futuristic would be, I imagine, a mixture of data and analog synths where people can be connected with them and people can kind of respond to each other. That would be quite interesting. An analog global network. That sounds completely unfeasible and completely futuristic. So I'll go with that. And we can use it to defeat the AI that is taking over the world at the time and destroy all the robots and so on. So, yeah, some kind of analog synth that's also like a completely benevolent weapon to save us from AI and singularity.
Yeah, saving us from singularity is certainly a good idea. AI can be interesting though. Yeah, I mean it's great that you have immediately some ideas. Did you prepare that?
No, I'm an improviser, I'm afraid.
Lovely. Thank you, Matthew, for that very good question. Are there any more questions or any requests? We've got a very few last minutes, and Susanna could play something in a last excerpt, or any other final questions before we wrap up? Matthew, I just got. I couldn't tell if that was a new hand or not.
Yeah.
If anyone else have a question, then
I've got one little question that I was thinking about, because something that's been on my mind this week is about feminism and masculine patriarchal language, and what can we do, right? And what can I encourage people to do to support women in creativity and in the arts? Is there anything that we can do?
Yeah, I think you know that's one of the crucial questions. For example, when with Female Pressure, we have been doing these fact surveys where we analyze the gender diversity of electronic music festival lineups. In the course of publishing these surveys, I get often asked, what what is your aim? Like, what is your ideal ratio of gender? And many people are tempted to then say 50-50. And I think it's impossible to say 50-50 because that, again, is like a reinforcement of the binary view of the genders. So it's a tricky question. And my escape is to say 1/3. So 1/3 cis men and 1/3 mixed acts and 1/3 women and non-binary acts, for example. That's just an example. So what can you do? You can start making music or making art or collaborate with people who are not cis men, basically with women and non-binary people, and start collaborations. That's one thing. The other thing is to mentor, of course, without any, often mentoring, like when a man mentors a woman, it's sometimes a bit tacky or it has like some second thoughts, but of course it should be without such second thoughts. Yeah, but teaming up with women, I think, is basically a good one of many strategies that we can think of. Another strategy would be if you want to enable like women to participate in whatever, then it is unfortunately still necessary to also think about childcare. So if you want, let's say, encourage women to work with you or your institution, then maybe also think about, okay, where can children go in the time if the women have to take care of children at the same time. But there are many things that people can do, and we all can do.
Okay, so I'll boil that down into basically, if we're not organising something but we're attending it, question and kind of gauge diversity, and ask the question. Be like, oh, why aren't there more women? Just so that the organiser of an event can be mindful of it. And the second thing is just collaborate as much as possible, which is great advice. So thank you.
Yeah, we could talk. I've got loads of opinions on this, but we could talk for ages about this. There was a thing, we must wrap up soon, but a few years ago where some male DJs were writing into their contracts that they wouldn't perform on all male lineups, and that at least 2 women, in fact, and else they wouldn't kind of play a gig. So there's also other techniques around.
That's right. That is what became a thing in Hollywood as an inclusion rider in the past years. Yeah, that's much the same idea.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we could have gone on for so much longer, and yeah, there was so much you skipped over in the presentation that also looked really amazing. Maybe one day we can have you back if there's a dropout or something. We can extend the invitation again. I would have loved to hear you talk at length about all the other works and the granular synthesis, but I will send the slides around. And Susanna, are you happy to our guests? So I'll send the slides around to the students. Are you happy if the guests, if they email me, can I send them the slides as well? I've had a couple of...
What I will do, I will share the PDF I prepared right now.
Oh, wonderful.
Very
generous of you.
Sure. So, because that is an updated version, I did not send this to you, Annie, yesterday.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was going to send the one that you sent to me, but if you have a newer one, then can also send that around to people.
Yeah. It's converting a PDF now. Upload failed. Maybe it's too big.
Yeah, there is that problem. Anyway, maybe you email it to me, and then if anyone, I'll send it around to all the BA students, and if anyone else wants it, then you can find my email on the ChrisAct website, and with your permission, Susanna, then I will send that around to people. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Susanna, so much for your lecture.
Thank you.
A pleasure to have you. Thank you to our Q&A group. Fantastic. Really enjoyed your questions, and I liked how you rotated and different voices and faces on screen. I like a bit of that. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks so much, Susanna. I'm just going to ask the rest of you to stay behind for a second. Lauren, are you saying something to me?
Yeah, is it okay if I send the question that I have to you, email to you, because I feel like you would be able to point me in the direction of some things that I can
Of course. Yeah, if it's for Susanna, I can also pass it on to Susanna, and if I can help you, then obviously I will help you.
All right, thank you.
Lovely. Okay, thanks so much, Susanna.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. It was lovely to be here.
Thank you for coming. Okay, everyone else, so just your final reminder about the password for today. If you arrived late, there it is. That's for BA students only. And same as always, please do the research for next week's practitioner, the Q&A group. Please self-organize as the group this week so wonderfully did. And extra incentive to do your research and questions this week is because Joel Stone and our guest for next week will have to stay up until 1:30 in the morning to give his lecture to us. So that is some commitment, and I want you all to return his efforts by making sure you ask him some very good questions. So a bit of appreciation. Wonderful. Okay, sorry we ran over a bit. Take care, everyone, and see you next week. And thank you again to our Q&A group. Bye-bye. Right. If anyone else is still here, I'm going to start kicking you out so that I can talk to the technicians. Matthew, did you have anything else you wanted to ask? I can still see you.
Oh, hey. I've always got more questions, but no, I think you've got plenty to get on with, haven't you? So do you want to boot me out?
I will be booting people out, but you're welcome to boot yourself out. Please come again next week. Okay, Roberto, no worries. Email me and I'll register you. Okay, so don't worry about that. I can probably do it now. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Bye. Okay, I've done it, Roberta, so you don't need to email me. Okay, bye, everyone. See you next week.